It's late. I haven't done this in a while, but let's get on with the first weekly installment of The Rundown. Welcome to The Rundown. I'm your host, Skylar Budman, and thank you very much for joining me on this late Sunday night. What exactly is The Rundown, you're probably wondering, and I'm wondering the same thing myself. What it is right now, it's going to be a weekly political show. I'm going to try and bring you the craziest breaking news from the week in the United States, locally, and across the globe. Try to address some of the things that really aren't being discussed or aren't being discussed in a way that I see fit. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. The Hill reported last week that the Biden State Department, they had voiced some concerns because the Taliban has enacted an all-male government. This comes from a September 7th report, and crazy as it sounds, it looks like the Taliban, after the United States has left Afghanistan, and that's a topic that I think is far overdue discussing. The United States, should we have left Afghanistan? There's two sides to that coin. I mean, can we continue to keep troops in that area, in that region of the country? We have troops all over the world, so the counter argument would be, we have troops all over the world. Why is this any different? Whereas a lot of people have said this is an endless war. We have to put an end to endless wars. That's the slogan. Normally when things are simplified and boiled down into a slogan, though it sounds good, I don't necessarily think that that's the answer. Based on the information I've gathered, I don't know if it was the best idea. Obviously, hindsight's 2020. Our departure has led to some rough things like an all-male government. Now, normally I'm not somebody who preaches diversity, especially when it comes to immutable characteristics. So what's the difference between a man and a woman if they both believe the exact same thing? I don't think their genitalia is going to lead to any sort of progress. But the Taliban, all-male government. So some of you, just like me, you might be shocked. You might have thought the Taliban embodies all things diverse. You look at the Taliban, you think they're this great organization. When have they ever done anything wrong? And how could they disappoint us like this? We leave Afghanistan, and all of a sudden they're going to have this all-male government in 2021. Double check the date. It's 2021. All-male government. Not a good look. So I did some digging, and I don't know if you guys have heard of this group, the Taliban. I guess the Biden State Department hasn't, and that's okay. I mean, who keeps up with the Taliban? But in all seriousness, it's almost laughable. It's pathetic. It's pathetic to think that our government, after leaving Afghanistan, like let's just assume that was our goal. We wanted to ensure there was diversity in the region. We wanted to ensure that was the only thing we wanted to ensure, that the government was diverse in the region. So we cede our control, our position where we're enabling the Afghan government. We cede that control, and oh no, the Taliban comes in. The Afghan government, they fall within a couple minutes, it seems like. And who would have thought? The Taliban's back in power. These are some rules. This is what I found about the Taliban, and this is in all seriousness. I find this absolutely terrible. I found this on a website. Their acronym is RAWA. RAWA stands for Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan. Established in 1977, it's an independent political / social organization of Afghan women fighting for human rights and social justice in Afghanistan. Now, up until recently, when the United States left, right before then, I'm sure RAWA was probably doing some good work. they're probably actually instituting some very modern and progressive cultural concepts into Afghanistan. I have no idea what they do. But I stumbled upon their website because I thought, what are the rules? I knew that the Taliban was a very restrictive regime. I knew that they weren't one of these free regimes. I didn't think, it goes, the United States and then the Taliban in terms of free regimes. So I looked into this, and it's actually astounding. I saw the use of cosmetics banned. This goes on to say women with painted nails have had their fingers cut off. All right, not so good. Whipping of women in public for having, non-covered ankles. If your ankles are exposed, under the Taliban's rules, you will be whipped. Whipping, beating, and verbal abuse of women if they are not clothed in accordance with Taliban rules, or if they're not accompanied by a maram. A maram, I didn't know this, I looked it up, is basically a blood relative, male blood relative, who a woman must be accompanied by in order to go about her life. Continuing on, ban on women studying at schools, universities, or any other educational institutions. That alone, and I could be wrong, maybe this is common sense to me, not common sense to the administration, the State Department. I see another one here, but I'll say that afterwards. You're not allowed in educational institutions, but the Biden State Department is shocked that they're not being placed into government positions. This rule here, and there's plenty of rules I see. There's 29 rules here, but this is probably a good indication. Ban on women laughing loudly goes on to say, no stranger should hear a woman's voice. That kind of precludes you. If that's a rule, you're kind of precluded from being in government. I guess unless you're going to be silent. I honestly, how could anyone have thought? And the State Department, it's embarrassing. I saw Nancy Pelosi, and I don't have the quote. I don't even want to look at it because I think it's a joke. But Nancy Pelosi had said that, she's shocked also about the Taliban and their non-inclusive government. I'll pull up the quote here. She went on to say, let's see, this is from the Wall Street Journal. She has a stern feminist warning for the Taliban. And keep in mind, we're talking about a regime that thinks a woman's voice shouldn't be heard in public. But Nancy Pelosi is going to say something in a stern voice. And certainly the Taliban will quiver. They'll be quaking in their sandals, and they will be unable to continue this oppression of women because she is deeply concerned about reports regarding the Taliban's brutal treatment of all Afghans, especially women and girls. This was reported August 15th, so this is kind of old, but it's unbelievable. Like, the lack of awareness, and it's from these people who, I guess they don't consider themselves to be elitists. I consider them to be elitists, but they're supposed to be, we know what's best for you people. That's the whole basis of their existence and their political ideologies. We know what's best for you. You don't know that the Taliban is, I guess, overly restrictive, to put it nicely. They have, to put it honestly, absolutely no regard for the rights of people, especially women who are just treated as complete second-class citizens. But we're shocked that the government is not inclusive of women. Okay. Anyway, moving on from that, just embarrassing, from one embarrassing headline to the next. Fox News and right-wing media frame Biden as evil, quote, tyrant after vaccination speech. This is reported by Mr. Oliver Darcy, CNN Business. This was updated September 9th, so something from the week. He starts off quoting, quote, an authoritarian, quote, rotting bag of oatmeal tyrant. That's fair. Rotting bag of oatmeal tyrant. Maybe that's a little harsh. Quote, very frail and very weak. These are a handful of the vile attacks directed at President Biden on Fox. These are the handful of vile attacks. Would you? I mean, all right, CNN. These are considered vile attacks. Very frail and very weak. Is that a vile attack? Is Biden very, very strong? Is that, I don't know. Maybe the rotting bag of oatmeal, but an authoritarian. Wasn't CNN calling Trump a Nazi every day? But that wasn't a vile attack. So this is in response. I'm sorry, I didn't really give the premise here. This is in response to Biden's newest mandate. He's trying to enact that businesses with over 100 employees, they ought to be required, and they will be required, to institute a vaccination policy where all their employees must be vaccinated, and if they are not vaccinated, they'll have to administer at least weekly testing. And I don't have the exact quote, but I thought this was really interesting because the first thing that came to mind is this constitutional, right? Now, the left takes a position, and this is setting aside the Constitution for a second, like the left tends to do all the time. But setting aside the Constitution for a second, the position here is that businesses should be required to do things separately from whether or not businesses would like to do those things. Now, certain instances, you have an easier time making this argument than other instances. So, for example, when you're discussing, say, whether or not all patrons should be allowed to frequent your business, you have a cake shop, for example, and somebody comes in and they say, hi, good sir, I'd like you to bake a cake for my wedding. I, a human man, am marrying another human man. Now, when a baker says, just for example, he's not interested in doing this cake, the left takes the position that he has a public business, he ought to serve the public, and he, the baker, cannot discriminate on the basis of somebody's sexuality who he would like to serve. The right very often takes the position that as an individual who owns a shop, I'm allowed, as the owner of the shop, to determine who I'd like to serve. So that's generally the disposition of both the right and the left. Now COVID's thrown things for a loop. For example, when it comes to whether or not a business can require a patron to brandish a vaccination card, the right has taken the position that this ought not be allowed, whereas the left has said this is okay. Some people on the right, there is an exception. Some people on the right have said, sure, if a business wants to require you to brandish a vaccination card, the beauty of the free market is that you don't have to frequent that business. And I'm just hashing this out right now because it's a tough situation. The left, though, on the other hand, they're perfectly okay with discrimination on the basis of vaccination status. Now, of course, there is an argument to be made coming from the left that your vaccination status has an impact on those people around you, whereas your production, your creation of a cake supporting the union between two individuals of the same gender, that doesn't have any, there's no negative externality. You're not impacting other patrons of the bakery. I could make the argument that you are, but you're not making anybody sick. If you're not vaccinated for COVID, the argument is that you can make people sick. Now, of course, there's holes in that argument. Like, it seems like you could still get COVID. No, it seems like you can still get COVID with the vaccine if you are vaccinated, though if you are vaccinated, though, and you believe in the efficacy of the vaccine, why worry about those people who aren't vaccinated? These are some of the confounding questions that still exist out there that are not being addressed. But back to the point. The point is that you have some people who feel as though the government should mandate things that occur in businesses. And this goes all the way back to, say, the civil rights movement, when businesses, at first, because of Jim Crow laws enacted by Democrats in the South, they made it illegal by legislation for businesses to be integrated by race. And then, through the Civil Rights Act, also passed by Democrats, then it was illegal for you to discriminate on the basis of race. And both of those forms of legislation, despite them being on opposite ends of the spectrum, they both address the same concept. If you're somebody who takes the position that a business should be allowed to operate in the way that they see fit, then in some respects, you have to be okay with a business deciding to discriminate and a business deciding not to discriminate. However, if you're comfortable with the government making these decisions, then when their tune changes, then so shall yours. It's a tough situation. It's tough to talk about because it's not very politically correct. But right now, the left is doing their best to interpret the Constitution in the cutest way possible to justify this. And so, after hearing about this mandate, the first thing that dawned on me is this isn't constitutional, and I thought, how could the left do something that's not, or even suggest to do something that's not constitutional? Don't they love the Constitution? I said, very seriously. And then, I looked into it, and so here's some of the theories that are coming out, and I'm going to, obviously, one of the best websites for, one of the best resources for learning about the Constitution, of course, is Vox.com. This is a website, if you haven't heard of it, built, designed, basically by constitutional scholars. And so I saw two theories that were proposed. Vox pushes the theory that this is, of course, not constitutional. I love their headline. Are Biden's new vaccine requirements legal? And then this is the subheader. They probably are, but that doesn't mean that a right-wing judiciary will uphold them. Because the right, notoriously, doesn't like the Constitution. You know, the left is always saying, oh, we love the Constitution, and the right's always, trying to, burn American flags and say, like, this, we need a Constitution that works for everyone. So September 11th, 2021, the right, apparently, expressed frustration over they voiced frustration over Biden's announcement that Americans, let's see what it said, the most potent of the announcements is a rule requiring large employers to protect their workers from unvaccinated colleagues by requiring them to either be vaccinated or submit to weekly testing. That's all it is. We're just protecting unvaccinated people. Or we're protecting, vaccinated people from their unvaccinated colleagues. We're protecting vaccinated people from if you say it too many times, it doesn't make sense. The vaccinated people, remember, the people with the vaccine for COVID, intended to prevent them from getting very sick from COVID, are worried because there are people who don't have the vaccine, who might get COVID, then give them COVID, and then they'll get COVID with their vaccine, and they're worried about the effect it'll have on them, so they think that you should get the vaccine, because if you get the vaccine, then when you get COVID, and if you give it to them, then it'll be different than if you get COVID and don't have the vaccine and give it to them. So Vox puts forth this theory, and I think this is great. Jacobson v. Massachusetts. Jacobson v. Massachusetts, a 1905 case that says states can require vaccines because Jacobson, this is the story, I'll tell you the story. Back in 1905, Massachusetts enacted this law requiring healthy adults, I believe of the age of 18 or 21, to get the COVID vaccine. And here it is. And it was challenged, of course, because some people don't want to get the vaccine. So it was challenged, and the Supreme Court was, they said, this is state right, and states have police powers. And Jacobson, the individual bringing suit against Massachusetts, who appealed to the Supreme Court, he was fined. He was fined, and the fine at the time was $5. So $5 in 1905, what does that equal? In today's money, it equals about, wait for it, it equals about $100. So he's fined $100 for not getting the vaccine. So it's not that strict of a regulation. And we're talking about a smallpox vaccine. So you have to contextualize everything. First of all, this is during a time when just a couple years later, Virginia passed this legislation basically permitting eugenics, permitting the sterilization of individuals in order to prevent their offspring from coming into existence because I think it said 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. This is the quote. This is the era that we're talking about. This is in the 1920s and 1930s. 1927. This is right before the Supreme Court started a whole era known as the Lochner era, where they just embraced the idea of laissez-faire. People hate this era of the Supreme Court. This is also in the 1930s. Then right after that was the Roosevelt era, where the government was basically allowed to do anything they wanted. Roosevelt's notoriously known for his invocation of a form of soft fascism. I mean, you're talking about a completely different time in the United States. Obviously, Vox cites this case because this is the only case that could even remotely be used to support the idea that, yes, requiring vaccinations is okay. But it's absurd. I mean, you're talking about over 100 years ago. That's the case that they're resting their whole position on, to the point where they're saying, obviously. I mean, it's laughable. But this case, Jacobson v. Massachusetts, and this isn't intended to give Jacobson v. Massachusetts the unfair presentation. I'm not intending to paint this in a horrible way, but Jacobson v. Massachusetts, it's a terrible example of what of justification of the constitutionality of this new mandate. I mean, the mandate we're talking about, I think it's $14,000 in fines that a company could face per employer or employee who's not vaccinated. You're talking about a pretty expensive trade-off here. You're not talking about the same situation as in Jacobson, where you're talking about $100. And I'm not saying that's not still very steep, but a company with 100 employees, if you have 50 employees who aren't vaccinated, you're talking about $100 per employee. Carry the one, you're talking about $5,000, 50, 100, $5,000, $5,000. I mean, we're talking about a completely different set of facts here. So to compare it just because we're saying, well, it was a vaccine, there was an outbreak. Smallpox was very deadly, especially for children. It was very deadly. So it's a completely different set of facts. But Jacobson v. Massachusetts was also used to justify this case, Buck v. Bell, where the Supreme Court upheld a Virginia law authorizing the involuntary stabilization of, quote, feeble-minded persons. I mean, talking about eugenics. So I don't, and not that the left is against eugenics, and saying something like this is, I think most people on the left are against eugenics, but I'm not saying something like this in order to give Jacobson an unfair presentation. But this is a quote from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. He says, quote, "Society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover the cutting of the fallopian tubes. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And he quotes Jacobson v. Massachusetts as his support. We've come a long way. So that was one theory that was fielded. The other theory, and this is put forth actually by somebody who I would say is more of a respected constitutional scholar. I don't know who he is, but I'm sure he doesn't know who I am. So this isn't meant to be offensive towards him that I don't know who he is. I just don't know who he is. But some legal experts are suggesting that the reason that this is okay, the reason that this vaccination requirement is okay, is because of the Article 1 of the Constitution, the Commerce Clause. Article 1. I think it's Article 1, Section 8. But I could be wrong. And this logic is that, well, if companies... Well, maybe I should read Article 1, the Commerce Clause, first before I go off about what it is. But the Commerce Clause says that Congress has the power, quote, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So Congress has the power to regulate commerce. So the Commerce Clause has been broadly interpreted to encapsulate the government's ability to make decisions about pretty much anything. And there's an old case. This dates back to, let's see, very far, very long ago. 1938, maybe. Man, I should really do better research. But Darby, that's the case. U.S. v. Darby, where the Commerce Clause was used to establish a federal minimum wage. These are all the things that it was used for. It was used to establish a federal minimum wage. It was used to establish a 44-hour work week, which is a little bit longer than the 40-hour work week. But it started with this idea, and I'm not going to go deep into the analysis of the Constitution that was used, but the idea is, it's very simple. It's that you have a business in one state, and your business does business in other states. That's interstate commerce. Because you're doing something that's interstate within other states, the government Congress specifically, has the ability to regulate what you do. And so, if, for example, you pay your employees $1 an hour, and keep in mind, I'm not talking about you force your employees they're not slaves. You would contract with your employees and say, I'm going to pay you $1 an hour. The government says, well, no, that's not allowed because you are doing business in another state. And because that's interstate, we can regulate the commerce. So we're not talking about the quality of the goods. We're not talking about like a safety standard. We're talking about, because you do business in another state, we can tell you how much is the lowest amount that you are allowed to pay your employees. It's very attenuated. I mean, when you really think about, you have the Constitution says Congress has the power to regulate commerce. One would think, me, stupidly, would think, oh, that means that if I sell a product, say that product is for children and uses lead-based paint, the government can step in and say, hey, look, no, that's not okay. It's dangerous. But does it really seem to suggest that now the government can come in and say, yeah, you can't do the lead-based paint thing? I say, okay. And also, how much are you paying your employees? Okay, that's not allowed either because you participate in interstate commerce, so you have to follow these rules about your business that don't have a bearing on interstate commerce. They might give you a competitive advantage, just like maybe, I don't know, having a better idea would give you a competitive advantage, but it might just give you a competitive advantage. It might not affect the product, might be an agreement that you arrived upon with your employees. Hey, you could work 50 hours a week. I'm actually going to pay you a higher rate. That's actually not allowed. The government can regulate it. So the other argument is that, well, because businesses tend to do business with other states, now we can tell them that all their employees have to be vaccinated. Doesn't matter if nobody in the business cares. Doesn't matter if everything you're doing is above board. You're making sure that people are maybe, I don't know, virtual. Who knows? Point is 100 employees. Why 100? Why not 50? Why not 10? I have no idea. It doesn't. So if you have 98 employees, 99 employees, and none of them are vaccinated, that's okay. But if you have 100, no. All of a sudden, COVID becomes a risk. So that's how I always say, and you wouldn't know this, but I do always say this: trust the science, and that's science. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to start talking about the science as if I know. But the long and short of it is, it's absurd. What we've allowed the government to do up until this point is totally absurd. The government has overstepped its boundaries time and time again, and the truth is that it's our complacency, maybe not our complacency, but the complacency of the generations before us that has opened up the door for the government to start saying, yeah, we're going to keep pushing the bill and just see how far we can take it, right? Give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So, embarrassing. Anyway, moving a little bit away from the Biden news, I wanted to talk about a story that came out, I guess this is a little bit of an older story. Just at the end of August, this came out, where a CBS affiliate and the teachers union in Broward County, they are taking advantage of local tragedies now to try and attack Governor DeSantis. If you didn't know, Ron DeSantis, he's like the foremost Republican right now, next to Trump. There's a lot to talk about there. DeSantis he's a composed guy. He stands up for himself. He's articulate. He's got a good background in politics, pretty good track record, and he's a threat. I mean, he's a total threat to the Democrats right now because of their position. Obviously, they don't want a guy like DeSantis rising up and potentially running for president. So they're going to start their smear campaign basically as soon as they can. So the story, in a span of less than 24 hours, 4 teachers working in the county passed away from COVID-19. They contracted this COVID-19 weeks before the beginning of the school year, starting on August 19th. However, these deaths, they blamed on DeSantis' order to drop the mask mandate. So teachers, very tragically, obviously, die from COVID. Before school starts, they were sick with COVID. School starts, they die, and then the teachers union and the CBS Miami writes a story that these teachers died after Broward County School Board voted to, around the same time, Broward County School Board voted to drop they dropped their mask mandate or whatever it was. I guess Broward County has defied the mask mandate. So this is the DeSantis. He released an executive order instructing the Florida Department of Health to develop rules that, quote, do not violate Floridians' constitutional freedoms or, quote, parents' rights under Florida law to make healthcare decisions for their minor children, and do, quote, protect children with disabilities or health conditions who would be harmed by certain protocols such as face masking requirements. Obviously, we're talking about something that basically doesn't kill children at all, yet, we want to require everyone to wear a mask because masks work. This is, again, you gotta follow this. Masks work if you wear a mask and the other person is wearing a mask. But if you're not wearing a mask and the other person is wearing a mask, that renders their mask useless against an illness that basically kills 0 children. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting that the media is starting their attack on DeSantis, which probably means that DeSantis is a very real threat. So, maybe, I don't know, maybe we're going to see a President DeSantis coming up, or at least DeSantis taking a crack to run against the great Chief Joseph R. Biden. And lastly, this is a story that popped up on Twitter. This is from this evening, and this is something that I don't know. I guess politics is just politics are tough, and people are really starting to take sides here. This comes from a Twitter user. This tweet, I guess it went viral. It has like 10.6 thousand likes, 1,164 retweets. It says, "I think my husband and I are splitting. I cannot be with someone who will not stand up to this tyranny. He said he'll get the jab if mandated by his job. I will not. There's no compromise for me." So, I don't know. I thought it was interesting, worth bringing up. A marriage splitting up because a husband wants to get vaccinated, his wife doesn't. I don't know. It's interesting. It's something that I'll leave you with to think about. I guess I might as well give my opinion on the matter before I sign off here. It seems absurd, honestly. It totally seems absurd. It doesn't sound like there's more underlying issues just than the fact that he wants to get vaccinated. Maybe he's got some other problems also. Not as a problem if you want to get vaccinated. I mean, to each his own. But maybe there's some other issues. I just can't imagine this being the breaking point in a marriage. It seems like something that you could probably work through. Now, there is tyranny. There is tyranny in the government. There is tyranny in the government saying you have to get vaccinated. But is there tyranny in a private business saying that you have to get vaccinated? Is it tyrannical to say that? I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. You're as an employer, you're requiring somebody to do something, and I've thought about this, and I think that there are potential problems, right? If you can't get vaccinated for medical reasons, or you won't get vaccinated, or you can't get vaccinated for religious reasons, can an employer legally terminate your employment with the company because of religious reasons? That would seem to violate other aspects of the Constitution, right? An employer has the right, say, to govern their business in the way they see fit. However, can they discriminate on the basis of religion? And the answer would be no. You can't discriminate on the basis of religion. A restaurant can't open up and say, no Catholics or no Jews allowed. So it presents an interesting point. Obviously, that's not what this woman is going for. Her name is Bex Lago, at Bex Lago. It's not what she's going for. She's obviously going for something different, but I don't know. I think there's got to be more to the story. This is how Bex is presenting it, but I think there's got to be more. Anyway, I've gone on for long enough. Thanks for joining me on the first episode of The Rundown. And in a world where everyone's trying to be something that they aren't, keep being you. That's it for this week, and I'll catch you next time on The Rundown.